You are now entering the horror section.
Welcome back to the Horror Sanctum podcast. I'm Jay with John, Kellen, and TJ. And this week we are not only going to embark on our third vampire movie since our inception, but our third Dracula movie. We first came the horror of Dracula, then we did Renfield, and now 2023's The Last Voyage of the Demeter. If you're not familiar, it follows the crew of the Demeter who set sail to London with a ship full of unmarked wooden crates, one of which harbors Dracula himself.
Yeah, so The Last Voyage of the Demeter. I was pretty skeptical about this movie when I saw the trailers. I just think that I didn't know what they were going for exactly. I liked the idea. It was a cool concept going back to Bram Stoker's book and talking about the ship, the Demeter. That name is a tricky title too, right? It's an interesting name, but it's also one of those names that I don't know. It also can lend itself to some films that are not so great, just based on the title. I think probably just so wordy. But yeah, it's an interesting movie. I kind of have some mixed feelings about it. The director, his name was Andre. Forget his last name. I'm going to butcher
Overdahl.
I had it in my notes, but I wasn't even going to attempt to try.
He's the guy that directed Troll Hunter.
Yeah, Troll
exactly.
Hunter.
Yeah, and Troll Hunter is such a great found footage movie. Like, that's such a creepy, really underrated movie. And he did a lot of other things. But you know, it's kind of really taken that prequel idea with the Bram Stoker book. And I haven't read that book in so long. The thing about this that's the first apparent problem to me is just kind of with vampires in general. I've always and this is just a personal taste thing, so a lot of people may not agree with me, but the idea and the lore of vampires is way more interesting to me than Dracula ever has been. Just because when you take a vampire and you put them in modern times, like Fright Night or Lost Boys, or Let the Right One In, a different take, or, 30 Days of Night. Those are really fascinating because you're taking this, basically this ancient creature, this monster, and putting it in these modern situations. And there's a lot of interesting things you can do there. I think the thing with Dracula is it's a great book. It's a great story. The original movie with Bela Lugosi is a classic film. I think that the 1992 Francis Ford Coppola movie is great. It's hard to touch that with what Gary Oldman did with prosthetics and the practical effects. That's still a movie that is so scary. I mean, there's so many things that are frightening in that movie. Just the way that Gary Oldman's The Dracula changes and the different looks. So it's hard for me because it's so easy to compare to that stuff. With this movie, the vampire. It is practical, but there is a lot of elements of CGI to the vampire that I didn't really like. I don't want to say it was bad. I just didn't enjoy it. Like, especially the face, the way they did the design, they made him more monstrous. They made him more like a creature, more like kind of like Nosferatu, like Count Orlok. Yeah, exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that. I kind of like it to where I think it's the eyes too with Dracula. I always like when the eyes are really done well, and I just didn't like the way they went with the eyes in this movie. I don't even want to say the creature was not scary. He was. I mean, there were some genuine, tense, scary moments in this film that really built up, especially like one of the first kills where you see him crouched up in the corner of the ship. And he does this side swipe thing on one of the crew members. But yeah, I mean, I think overall the movie itself, there's nothing like spectacular or great going on in the film. It's well done in a lot of ways. The acting is fine. I think everyone plays their part pretty well. It kind of feels like one of those movies though it's like the kind of movie you put on like a lazy afternoon, you put on and it kind of comes and goes. You watch it, you forget about it. So like I said, I don't know if I could say it was bad or anything. There's nothing really that was like offensive. In fact, some things were kind of cool. I mean, I like that they tried the whole blood transfusion thing. That was cool. There's not many movies that do that. Near Dark is one movie that did that, where the dad tries to transfuse his blood with his sons to help him. So that was kind of cool. Those type of things that they tried.
The
I just
original
thought,
Bela Lugosi Dracula does that too.
oh, they did. See, I didn't
And
remember
the
that.
horror of Dracula, they tried to give blood and transfuse as well.
Oh wow, yeah. See, that's my I need to rewatch those then. I just think
You're lacking in your Dracula lore.
I know my Dracula lore. I've watched too many modern. I think that's the thing. I've watched too many modern vampire films, and they've kind of skewed my perception of what I want in a vampire. And I think for 45 million, I think that was the budget, 45 million. I just would have expected more. I really think the creature they could have done better with that. I think that it just didn't feel like it was $45 million what they did there. So I don't know. I did like parts of it, but overall, I gotta say it was kind of a disappointment in other ways. So I think it's worth watching. I do think if you like the book, it's worth seeing. It stretches out that story in the book about the Demeter. So it's definitely worth seeing that just to see what they could have done there. But I think as long as you tailor your expectations is the key with this. So
yeah, I was really pumped to see this movie in the theaters just off of the trailers that had been showing for a while. But then as soon as it come out, almost immediately started getting trashed with reviews or having mixed reviews at best. And then I kind of lost my luster for wanting to go see it immediately. So it had been out several weeks before I finally made it out, because it's kind of it's the low season in between the summer and the spooky season kind of movie releases. So I wanted to see it before it left theaters, if for nothing else other than to pay for my Regal Unlimited pass to make it worthwhile. But I really love this director for the most part. Between Troll Hunter and The Autopsy of Jane Doe, some really good films this guy's made. So I know he has the chops, and I was interested to be on the as a, like, Dracula is my favorite of the classic Universal monsters, and most of the classic monsters of like older folklore and stories and whatnot. I love the Bram Stoker's Dracula novel. It was the first horror novel I ever read. When I was like 8 or 9 years old, I read it on a road trip to see my grandparents in the lower part of South Carolina, and I was hooked on Dracula and vampires ever since. So I know that in the actual book, Dracula is painted more as the monster, the Nosferatu type looking creature. He's not normal looking. He is monstrous in the way that he's presented. So I'm fine with that to an extent. And I think that in the unauthorized version Nosferatu of the novel, and then later the remake with Klaus Kinski that Werner Herzog did in 1979, kind of picking up on that same visualization, really actually does do the book justice more than the ones that are more classic. Like the Bela Lugosi version of Dracula is the suave, debonair, erudite kind of guy. The Count, right? A Count is a aristocrat. That's what the cape signified, an aristocratic, wealthy landowner, basically, back in the day. I think the novel was written in 1897. So in that Victorian period, that was a class symbol. And really the whole characterization of Dracula as being that kind of guy instead of a monstrous monster really come out of the theater and pre-film days, really. And Dracula, actually, Bela Lugosi first played the role on Broadway productions of the first stage adaptation. Of course, in those days, it's the 1920s, early 30s. You just couldn't throw total monstrosities at people with no real special effects other than, like a red handkerchief for blood or something like they used to do in those old kind of vaudevillian days of theater. So I give it a pass that they had to kind of go a offshoot from Bram Stoker's original vision. But what happened was Bela Lugosi made that role so iconic that became the only way we could ever see Dracula for decades and decades. And everybody was just trying to copy some version of Bela Lugosi's Dracula instead of Bram Stoker's Dracula at that point, which is it's the blessing and the curse of doing a really great acting job in a very specific role. Bela Lugosi peaked in his first speaking feature film, which was one of the first talkie films, period. Todd Browning, who had come up doing silent films, actually filmed a lot of like the opening sequence with no real sound except some Foley sounds like of rats and stuff like that. Wasn't a whole lot of score. There was a theme that kept getting used throughout the film, but I mean, it was still very early days of using sound in film. So Todd Browning used it very sparingly. But to get back to the Last Voyage of the Demeter, the thing I was the most interested to kind of see this take on was it's literally the captain's log is just a very small portion in the early part of the book. And so this is a very unique film in that it's positioned that it is built in a universe that was created by Bram Stoker, but with characters and plot elements that were not. So you kind of have this license where, yes, you're paying homage and basically building out what amounts to a handful of pages in this classic novel into a 2-hour almost film. And so you have a certain amount of license, which is where, they took, I think the most liberties they took was with deciding to make Dracula this man-bat monster, kind of like from Batman the Animated Series pilot episode where there's just a man-bat basically. And even towards the end, as he becomes more human-like, he still looks like the man-bat, which I think was, taking a little extra liberties. It's either make him one way or another. You kind of can't have both, I feel like. Even though, Francis Ford Coppola's version had both. He could just morph into other things, and that was fine. And I don't know. I think it was the thing that I and it's beautifully shot. The cinematography is actually really great in this film. It's well acted. I liked some of the set pieces, some of the building up of the tension, because it becomes kind of like a whodunit. The only problem is it lacks the tension because we as the audience always knew who done it. It's the crew that's gradually figuring out who done it. So I feel like there might have been an opportunity to present that a little better in a way that actually preserves some of the suspense. It's because from minute one, we know what's going on. And then it's just kind of the slog of waiting for them all to kind of die off one by one until they start to get the point what's happening, which takes about half the movie for them to kind of get on board with what's going on and try and rally against it. And I think this movie suffers from another thing too, is like, if you've read the novel or seen any of the movie adaptations that represent the novel, everybody's supposed to die on the ship. It's kind of like that thing of Rogue One. It's like, how the story's going to end before you go into it. It's like, well, but how's it going to get to there is kind of the intrigue and the curiosity. And they took some license with that too, by the end, where the guy ends up the main doctor guy ends up surviving by the end, which I actually kind of like that they kind of set up for a sequel, because that sequel would have like no precedence in the Bram Stoker's novel. It would just be based in those characters in that universe. Like that guy was not a guy that was in the novel. So I would actually be very interested in if they were to pick that up, or if that was just a teaser. I don't know if the film performed well enough theatrically to pick up and do a sequel, but I would check it out just to see what they do with it, because at this point you have a totally unique universe that's grounded in the Bram Stoker's characters. I think where it suffers the most, though, similar to John, is the representation of Dracula is totally lacks the humanity of Dracula, and the humanity piece is always what's made that character so intriguing to me, is how it's both man and monster, right? It's like a man that's trapped in this evil demonic kind of thing that has kept him immortal, and he has to prey on the blood of the living, the whole deal. And I feel like just making him a CGI monster totally takes away any pathos, any empathy, any mystery to this character. He's just the vampire Batman. And I think that's the weakest point of the story, even though I kind of like some of the things they do with the wings and the stuff towards the end. I just feel like they never really represent the humanity of the character the whole story's underpinned on. What do you think, Kellen?
Yeah, so just something that you said, and I think that they're building up to that in the next one. You see him as almost it's kind of reminding me of the first Mummy, when the mummy starts to feed off of people and gets stronger, starts to become more human-like. I think that's the direction they were going, especially with the ending showing him in the top hat and the coat, and he's starting to look more human. Still looks like a monster, but and the woman that was that he brought to feed off of, she pointed that out, and he wears human skin. So I feel like that's the direction they're going. It's hard. It's going to be hard to have a monster just walking around and people not recognizing it. So I feel like that's why he's, obviously something happened, caused him to become weak. He's fed off of everybody that he could there. So he's going to London to feed more. So I feel like that's the direction they're going. Is eventually he's going to get that human-esque look. Still a monster, but slowly working his way back to being something more human-esque, so that he can blend in and still feed. So I liked that aspect. That would probably be the only part that I would disagree, and it's probably because my Dracula is Draculacking as well. I don't have as much knowledge. We all know that my lack of classic movies that I should have seen, haunts me every time we start something where there's lore. But I like that they took it. The scene on the boat where he's basically kind of in the fetal position, and he uses his energy to slit the guy's throat and then feeds on him to get stronger. It's a brutal Dracula. There's no, like you said, there's no humanity. This is a killing machine. He's killing for purpose. He's killing almost for sport. I mean, at certain points, he mocks the people he's killing. So it's a very brutal, very dark version of Dracula, and of the Dracula movies I've seen, you're right, he has that kind of charisma about him where you almost want to like him, even though he is going to kill your favorite characters in the movie at some point in time. Even in Twice Bitten or Once Bitten, whichever I always get the name confused. The Jim Carrey, his first movie, Once Bitten. She's an elegant lady. She's very attractive. Of course, you would be drawn to her, and I think that's part of the lore of Dracula, is that you don't want to be eaten, but there's some magnetism about him that draws people in so that he can feed. Me and Jay talked about, or he mentioned this before. I won't go into it too much, but it's too long. There's too much in the movie they could have cut out. And one of them, and I'll probably get a lot of hate for this, the discussion about the racism, I didn't feel like that was needed. I feel like that was more politically driven with the climate and everything going on. They wanted to throw that in, but we're talking about, you know, a fanciful world where vampires live. I don't feel like that was needed. I feel like they could have given him a different reason for being in the position that he was in. So I felt like that was like a little 2-minute segment in the movie that they just threw in for purpose. Nobody treated him any different on the boat, so there was no, you know, direct racism that we saw. It was just him talking about it as trying to be a black doctor back in old times. And I bring that up because one show that handled the subject of minority situations so well was Schitt's Creek. You know, David on the show is gay. They never make an issue of it, and the purpose was to be like, it's not an issue. You know, all these people just accept him for who he is because that's the way the world should be. So that kind of pulled me out of the story for a little bit. I understand the purpose. I understand the climate that we live in. It's still a real thing. I just didn't feel like it fit in the movie they were making.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kellen, because I feel like that character wasn't written to be any kind of other race, and they just kind of shoehorned that in probably.
Yeah, and you know, they talk about, I mean, he's intelligent, he's capable, and then it almost feels like you just take a step back to point out, oh, by the way, I didn't get the same treatment because of my skin color. Like I said, I understand the purpose, understand with the climate and everything. I just don't feel like it was needed in this movie. Another issue that I have, and I noticed this while watching X-Files, and I understand why they did it in the X-Files. I don't understand why they do it so much in movies now, especially with how good CGI is, how good special effects are. It's too dark. You know, I ended up turning the brightness up while watching it because you can't see what's going on half the time because it's so dark. Like the X-Files is notorious for that. If you go back and watch it, there's so many scenes where they're in a hospital and it's like they spent all their budget on the MRI machine and couldn't afford light bulbs anymore. So they're walking down into OR rooms where it's like, I mean, turn the lights up. It's not, you're not going to get away with anything nowadays where you need it to be so dark. Like I said, I can understand in the 90s where special effects and everything weren't so great. You hide your crimes by making it a little darker, a little harder to see that things are fake. But even with a $45 million budget, they can brighten it up a little bit so that you can see what's going on. And back to the point about being brutal, he kills a dog and a kid. That's two faux pas that you don't see in horror films. The first thing that you see him kill is the dog. And then he attacks the child and they show it. They don't even shy away. It's not like he's in the floor. They show him pick him up and bite the kid on the neck. Like, you don't see that. So that, like I said, it was a very brutal portrayal. But overall, it was an enjoyable film. It's too long. It's too dark. It's got its issues. I'm with TJ. The man bat thing was a little overdone. Him with his, you know, like, where do those go? Where does this go when he's wearing the suit at the end? Are they retractable? Is he like the dinosaur in Jurassic Park? Where did those go? It's
not practical at all.
No, it's not practical having webbed arms. And then trying to wear a trench coat. So I don't know. I guess I can get what they were going for. They were going for a more literal interpretation of Dracula, a person that turns into a bat, instead of having him, like in What We Do in the Shadows, where they poof into bats. They just decided, we'll just make him bat person.
You know, he's getting those things caught in zippers all the time.
Exactly. Which makes you wonder how bad that has to hurt. But I overall, I liked the movie. I liked the tenseness that it built. Some of the kills in it were brutal. Just some of the scenes, the kid being thrown overboard and them showing his face as he, you know, sinks to the bottom was just, you know, heart wrenching. The dad from Game of Thrones reaching out
Sir
for
Davos.
him. You know, Sir Davos, yeah.
Sir Davos.
And speaking of him, this movie is like the upper B, lower A of actors. Like there's not really anybody big in it, but there's several faces that you see and you're like, oh, I know him, I know her. You see faces that you recognize, but none of them are like big names that you would consider, you know, A-list celebrities, or that I would. But overall, I enjoyed the movie. It wasn't a hard watch. That's typically how I judge whether or not it's a good movie or a bad movie. Was it a hard watch? Did I struggle to get through it? No, I didn't. It has its flaws. It has its weaknesses. Definitely stuff. It looks like they're considering maybe continuing with the way it ends. So definitely some stuff that they could work on in the next one. I think it would be nice if they made it more like a Sherlock Holmes type of thriller where it's him trying to outwit Dracula. But overall, it's a solid film. It's a solid film.
Yeah, I like we talked about, it was a little too long. They could have cut 15, 20 minutes, I think, and that would have helped. So my theory on the wing part and him wearing his suits around, I'm thinking the more he feeds, the more human he's going to become, and those are going to go away. That's what I think it's going towards, and he still kind of has the option to turn into that creature, like in What We Do in the Shadows, where they can turn into bats. That's how I kind of interpreted that. Like the more he feeds, the more human he's going to become, and eventually become the Bela Lugosi version that we know. As far as the sequel, would I watch it? Yeah. They should maybe wait till Halloween. I think that would have helped a lot. I think Renfield coming out before kind of hurt this one. But like Kellen said, it was $45 million to make, and it didn't gross over 15 in return. So that's that's a big loss. So I don't know if they'll go back to that or not. Stranger things have happened. Worse movies have been made. So who knows? It being too dark aspect, Kellen, you're like me, we watch it in the light. I think that would have been better, and it probably would have been a better experience had it been in the theater or at home at night with the lights off. That would make a difference. But yeah, like I've watched it twice in a week and a half, because I watched it when it came out on digital, and then we were talking about other episodes, and like we should do an episode on this because everybody's seen it and we can all watch it. I think I liked it more the second time I watched it. I like the cast, like David Dashmashin, like however you say his last name. I adore him. He's pretty close to an A-lister these days, I'd say. He's kind of becoming the face of horror because he's in everything. I think I watched 3 movies with him in it last week by accident. Like I did, not even thinking, like this one. And he was in the Dark Knight, which was on TV. I just happened to turn it on, and there he was. He was one of the cops that was working with the Joker. And then I watched another movie that I can't think of the name of, but he was also in it. Oh, The Boogeyman, the Stephen King adaptation of Boogeyman. He's in that as well. And he's everywhere. He's on Shudder. He's on Joe Bob. He's on Boulet Brothers. So he's getting up there. I adore him. I'll watch anything he's in. He's great. But aside from the being a little bit too long, I wasn't bored. It was kind of a slow burn to a degree. But I like movies that are in a small location like that, whereas like a house or a ship. And to my knowledge, and TJ, you would know better than me, I don't know if there's really been a vampire movie that's been 100% on the ship. Has it?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, so kudos to that. Like I give props for that, because I love the atmosphere the entire time. I loved if you really put yourself there, like being in a time like that, you really don't know what's going on there. You thought dragons were in the monsters were in the water, and you're on this ship at night going somewhere by the stars.
It's like the Victorian era Snakes on a Plane.
Right. And like just to be out there and the breeze going through your hair, and then you look and then there's a face, a monstrous face there. Like that's terrifying. It's a very terrifying situation. But I definitely like the atmosphere and the mood. With that being said, we'll go around and do our rankings and favorite kills. So kill wise, there were several, and they were all, some of them were pretty brutal, but the main reason I watched it again today is because the kills, because sometimes I watch and I'm distracted. So I miss some of the details. So after watching it again today to make sure I focus on the kills, and I think it was the second or third person human kills where he slams them into the deck repeatedly, just smashing his face. That was my favorite kill of the whole thing. It was brutal. It kind of made me like wince a little bit. And if you can make me wince, you're going to get a star from me. So that was my favorite kill. What about you, John?
I think the Petrovsky guy, the first guy that saw him when he was crouched on the ship, that was a pretty brutal kill when he kind of sideswiped him and then fed on him. And then I think the Bulgarian guy, the Romanian, the big guy that turns into the vampire. That was pretty brutal. Like him just sitting there, and he's like, it burns, and then he's just, in flames. I would say the Bulgarian guy is probably the most brutal, honestly. And I do want to say one thing, and I always have to bring this movie up because it just does not get enough love. David Dasmaloshian, I can't ever say his name. He was in Prisoners.
Yes,
which is
fantastic movie. So good. And also equally brutal. Like, it's a very brutal movie to watch.
Yes. Yeah, that movie is so awesome. I had to bring that up because that movie needs more love. But
I agree. All right, TJ, what was your favorite kill?
Yeah, I don't remember any of these cats' names or their characters' names, but the first guy that when the sun first started coming up, and then that was the first time that you noticed, oh, he's obviously been bitten and he's burning up in the sun. That was kind of unexpected. That was kind of cool. There's a lot of brutal kills in this one, but that was the one that I was like, oh, okay, this is cool.
Kellen?
Yeah, before I get to my kill, I'll just point out what Jay said earlier about the budget and how much it made. This is such a hard sell movie anyway. If you don't have the big name attached to it, it's a dark period piece. It's going to be hard. So I really hope that doesn't prevent them from hopefully continuing the story. 15 million for a movie like this is probably outkicking their coverage. Like I said, with no big names, a dark story. Most people probably don't even realize that it's about Dracula. The general audience, the general ticket buyer. So hopefully we get to see where the story goes from here. But I agree with the guy burning alive. I mean, that's such a strong visual. It's one of the few things in the movie. I mean, you see the ship captain when he's tied to the wheel and he holds up the cross necklace. You're expecting that to like cause him to go away, but he smiles and attacks him anyway. So that was kind of like one of the few scenes where you get that traditional, general knowledge vampire death. The sun kills them. That's why they hunt at night. That's why they stay in the shadows. So seeing him tied there, kind of he's reverted kind of back to his humanity a little bit. He's talking normal, and then he starts to say, it burns, and then he starts to smoke, and then just is engulfed in flames. Which my first thought was like, untie him from the wooden post. Don't have the giant flame on your wooden ship tied to the one thing that will get you where you're going. But that was just such a brutal scene. Same with the kid. I kind of put those A and B when he starts to burst into flames when the dad opens up the cloth and he grabs him and then he starts to catch on fire. It's just such a violent visual, and it's one of those things that I think if anybody, what would be the worst ways to die? Burning alive's got to be up there. So that would be fun.
Yeah, that one was pretty rough too. All I could think of the first kill where he was kind of like half slug, half Dracula was the dog Jesse from Family Guy that doesn't have his back legs. He's the pedophile neighbor's dog. I'm like, come on, Jesse. Like he drags himself. That's all I could see when I saw that both times. But yeah. So I think it'll also budget-wise, I think it's going to make some of that money back now that it's released digitally, and if they do a physical copy, especially with Halloween right around the corner, people are going to be renting this. That Boogeyman and Cobweb are all coming out at the right time, and people are going to start getting ready for spooky season. So hopefully they'll make some of that money back. All right. So rating wise, I think I had 3.5, but I'm sitting here thinking I'm going to drop it to a 3 for me. John?
Yeah, I would say, the one thing about this movie too that really brings it down for me is the dialogue. It's that end speech that Mr. Clemens does with the doctor guy when he's like doing the monologue. That was just when he's like about to fight Dracula. I don't know. That was too much for me. I was like, come on, man. Like, you don't know what this is. You're not going to be this prepared for, and it made me think of Bram Stoker's Dracula from '92 when there's that scene where Keanu Reeves and Gary Oldman are sitting at the dinner table and Keanu Reeves says something wrong and like Gary Oldman just like pulls the sword on him. Like that one scene is better than this entire movie. Like just thinking about that, I'm like, that's brilliant. But anyway, 2.5 out of 5. I don't hate it, but I probably wouldn't rewatch it much. So
Yeah, TJ.
I was just looking, and the worldwide budget or gross right now is like 20.2 million. So they're nearing their way to halfway there. So I think they'll eventually break even. But and I was also looking at all the scores. IMDb currently has a 6.2. It's got a 48% Rotten Tomatoes. That score keeps going down the longer it's been
Audience
out.
score on Rotten Tomatoes is in like 75.
Yeah, 76.
That tracks for a horror movie, I think.
Yeah, I mean that's typically how it goes. I was kind of on the fence. I'm kind of middle of the road with it, but I think I'm just right of center, kind of like Jay. I give it a solid 3 out of 5. I'll probably eventually rewatch it, especially if they are able to make a sequel, which I would watch. It's just it doesn't have a whole lot of replay factor just because it's such a long slog,
Yeah, Kellen.
Yeah, I'm right in line with that. It's a solid 3. It's like I said, it's a solid flick. But I'm with John. I don't know that I would watch it again unless somebody was like, "Hey, have you seen this? Let's watch it." Yeah. So 3.
Yeah, that's fair. So that's like 2.875. So we'll call that a 3. And, it's not a bad movie at all. So don't get us wrong. Like it's a good watch. But I don't know. It's one of those things. Like I was thinking about it when I did the rating on my Instagram page. Someone asked why so low, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know why I think that. I can't explain it, but there's just something about it that kind of pulls us away and draws us in a little bit. But 3, go watch it. It's worth watch. So that's going to be a wrap on this episode. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to wherever you listen to this podcast. Come follow us on Instagram. And this past week, I made an Amazon playlist. So if you have Amazon, just search for the Horror Sanctum podcast playlist. It features songs from the scores and soundtracks from the movies we've done so far. It features the artists that we've had on to talk to us, the composers, and all that fun stuff. I listened to it on the way home from work today, and it's pretty solid. So do that, follow, share, subscribe. We'd appreciate it. And come back next week. Next week, right now, we're chatting with Magdalene Rose, who's a musician, and one of her favorite movies, A Quiet Place. So come back for that one. All right. So for John, Kellen, TJ, I am Jay. And until next time,
keep it spooky.